Hello and welcome again, everyone. I am having a live conversation that I will be recording with a fellow liberalist English friend of mine who goes by Kizza. We're going to be talking today about an interesting topic that we originally were going to have on the hegemony of the United States, but that has been beaten to death by the usuals. So we decided to talk about something else that interests both of us. Kizza, would you like to tell us today maybe a little bit about yourself and what topic we're going to be discussing?
Good evening, all. I'm a young Englishman that I met years through the liberalist page, and we're talking about the future of Social Security, or the welfare state as I know it in England.
Often called a pension, I believe, over there. Here it would be called Social Security benefit.
Yeah,
Also, I believe England uses the term welfare pretty broadly, like we do here, to mean all of those programs together.
pretty much anything, everything from child support, working tax credit,
Mhm.
uh, work, everything regarding the state giving you money to survive. We basically
Mhm.
put as welfare. Pensions is specifically for people who are retired.
Okay. So then we'll be
Yeah,
talking about Social Security retirement here and pension
yeah,
benefit there. So it'll be the same thing pretty
yeah,
much. Okay. So to get the ball rolling, we're going
yeah.
to go through the things where you can find me. Kizza does not want to have an internet presence or be known, so he's going to stay anonymous and go by Kizza. However, since you're listening to me here, you already know that you can get to me on Yizz the Eunuch at excuse me, you can find me at Yizz the Eunuch here on YouTube. Also, everything is uploaded under the same name to BitChute. I have a subscribe star, as you can see here. I also, if you just want to give me some shekels, you can always hit me up through my PayPal me. And of course, you can find me at the social media sites of minds.com, Twitter, and Gab. So then, we'll go back to the YouTube homepage and we'll get started here. So, Mr. Kizza, how about you open
Yes.
up a topic idea for us to discuss in relation to the welfare state and pensions?
Okay, in regards to the welfare state or social security, how is it going to survive with the current situation regarding the aging population, increased population of the Western world, and the how is it going to adapt regarding the future of the Western world itself with the expansion of automation and changes in the economic landscape?
That's a fairly multifaceted opening statement there, but to get us
Yeah,
started, I think that in general, I need to say that the structure that we have in place for these things is going to collapse if we continue on without change. Primarily because of the thing you said about technological change, and secondarily because of how a never ending stream of migration issues is affecting both the UK and America. So, is there
for
a
sure.
particular facet that you would like to talk about first in regards to this?
Um, One that that depends. What do you really want to drop a grenade to start with?
Well, the thing that comes to my mind first, being American, is the mass migration problem. And I don't mean illegal immigrants that come through the southern border. That only accounts for a small percentage of the migrants to America. The primary problem that I see with the aging population, healthcare getting better, the opportunity for people to live longer lives, the issue here is the amount of wealth and taxation that will be required to keep people healthy with medical care, because part of retirement benefits in both countries is, of course, health care, is people who live longer are going to need more health care. And of course, that's going to come at a premium with the more people in your populace because, you know, even with the advent of superior medical technology, you still need people to implement that technology and you still need someone to pay for it. So, on sheer numbers alone, migration, because of the neocons, the neolibs, and the global corporations, they want a never ending growth to the population. But healthcare and pension is going to come at a never ending percentage cost to that population. So there's going to have to eventually be something that gives or breaks, because if we just push it the way it's going now, I believe it's all going to fall apart in the next 30 years. So, do you have something to say in response to that?
I the only thing I will say in regards to that is we may end up potentially going to a situation where we end up drastically increasing our ages of retirement, which I know countries like Finland have. I think they've raised theirs to 73
Hmm.
for both men and women. And they've also started to pull away from their taxation models, as the Scandinavian countries do have very high taxes to go by, despite how high they are in economic freedom. Despite many in the United States thinking they're socialist countries, they definitely are not.
Oh, they definitely are not.
And they've,
I don't make that mistake.
you know, no, for sure. But also, they're starting to feel the burden in their systems, and they're quite small populations compared to the UK, and
Hmm.
especially compared to the United States. So we really need to have these conversations now,
I
or we
think
can try and trickle on the path we're going, and then it will collapse, and everything will be basically a case of pure chaos.
apart from migration
Yeah,
boosting population number, and apart from
yeah,
technological changes, I think another major element to this complex house of cards is health and diet. Because when you look at several countries that have a more functional model to go by, like the Scandinavian countries you mentioned, they are
yeah.
vastly superior on average in health, diet, and lifestyle choices than America. America is probably one of the worst and fattest countries. We have rampant alcoholism, massive amounts of cigarette smoking, bad diets, people who live with little to no exercise. And I think that if those numbers continue to swell on and on, the more socialized healthcare becomes, the greater of a tax burden that's going to be on everyone else. And while I am not a free market absolutist and a complete laissez faire capitalist, I don't think that it's fair to say, okay, the taxes you have to pay for a responsible, healthy, long lived, productive individual goes up and up and up because the number of lazy, fat, non contributing people goes up and up and up. I don't think that's fair ethically, and I don't think that it's tenable mathematically.
No, it is definitely not. But the issue you do have is that, as I like to say to people when it comes to my NHS, which has effectively become an IHS,
Hmm.
International Health Service, is that when it comes to that, you've got to treat it like a sacred cow,
Hmm.
as or more, or should I say, a sacred resource. As in, yes, you have it, and it can be very huge, but you want to try and use it as little as possible.
I agree. I see what you're
Uh,
saying. The problem with a lot of people, I believe, in America, and I don't know if I don't necessarily want to call
there's
them leftists, but the people who believe in the welfare state system, because I imagine you have a lot of people of different leanings or no leaning that want that. I think a thing that they are missing is people's time, medicine, industry, electricity, etc., are finite resources. And if we are going to have a never ending growth of population with an ever increasing maximum age, those resources are going to be spread thinner and thinner without doing something to circumvent that.
Exactly, which is where like I have this issue with people when it comes to stuff like pensions, is that the reason the pension system worked so well before our time was because not many people were actually reaching the ages of retirement, hence why there was a massive bag of gold for
Hmm.
people who reached the retirement age to have nice retirements with.
Exactly.
Whereas nowadays it's considered the norm. And actually that pot is just naturally going to shrink and shrink and shrink until there is nothing.
60 years ago, someone who was 60 was usually at the end of their life if they even made it that far. Someone who
Exactly.
worked in a coal mine or a factory or an assembly line or was a farmer, usually, especially with the way healthcare was between 80 and 60 years ago in America, they likely were already wrought with health problems and near the end of their life. And then you fast forward 60 years later, and you have a vast swath of your populace living to 80 and 90 years old, living on the taxpayer dime for 20, 30 years. And that system is eventually going to collapse.
Well, exactly. It's like with Japan. They have, if I remember correctly, a mandatory retirement at 80 years old.
Hmm.
But the average life expectancy is like 85
Hmm.
between men and women. That is extremely high. The only things that topped out are tax havens such as Monaco, and they're having massive problems because of it.
Yes,
How are you supposed to supply 25 years worth of welfare as pensions burdens with your current population without taxing them to the ground?
exactly. That's a thing that a lot of the more popular YouTubers talk about when it comes to how to build a state and welfare state versus free market tactics. Is it's a never-ending or void of debt that you're laying upon the shoulders of the unborn in your society. And that
Yes,
will eventually be a leviathan that swallows the next generation, and your entire economic model will collapse. And and
yes,
and
which
and it won't be the fault of those who it collapses upon.
well, yes, which is where like I could understand me being a young millennial, quote unquote, and the Gen Zers, I can
Yes,
understand the animosity towards, let's say, the baby boomer
right.
generation
Or Gen
of
X, like
of
me,
ha-
for example.
yeah, not so much Gen X, to be fair, but more the
That's
baby
true.
boomers of
But
them
keep in mind,
saying
Gen
you
X are the ones who voted in the politicians that are in now, for the most part.
for sure. But the problem, but like I said, is when I speak to people about this, a lot of stuff goes from the baby boomers and even before them. So let's say the silent generation.
Hmm.
A lot of the stuff groundwork was done with, let's say, that generation, and it's basically become like a snowballing effect to where
Hmm.
the millennials and Gen Zers have had to deal with it.
And to be fair,
And
those
obviously,
those that argue against a radical change or cessation of this type of pension or social security welfare system is it ethically it is indeed unfair to change the system radically so people who have paid into it their entire lives get a diminished return or nothing. I do understand the ethical argument, but when it comes to your society, your economy, it is a numbers game, and you're going to have to break some eggs to make an omelet, so to speak, to use that old adage, where it might be worth saving the society and making future generations better to sort of give the shaft to the elderly now. And I know that that's a very unpleasant and unethical thing, but if you broaden your horizon of philosophy wide enough, I believe it becomes the only ethical choice.
well, yeah, but like the problem is that it's just the society in general doesn't want to have these conversations.
Yeah.
And the way I see it is you either have these conversations now and try and make adjustments to reduce the burden, or you don't have these conversations, keep on lolling about, doing what you do, and then you hit a giant brick wall and there's just major chaos everywhere.
And it's not related to this topic, but exactly what you just said. That's why people like Ron Paul, libertarians, and people that are concerned about large scale economics, like myself, we've been talking about the dangers of the House of Cards. With in America, it's called the Fed. It stands for the Federal Reserve, and
Oh, don't get me started on that.
it's
Do
how
not get me started on it.
okay, I won't, but you know what I
Yeah,
mean. Quantitative easing,
yeah,
basing the value of your
yeah.
dollar on
Printing of money, all that
basing the
stuff.
value of your
Yeah, no,
dollar on oil, which is directly tied to real estate value, which is exactly why the global corps and the mega rich want a never ending influx of migrants to ramp up property values, that kind of thing. That can only
yeah.
last for so long before the entire house of cards falls, and people like Ron Paul and me and others get called, you know, conspiracy theorists or whatever when we try to bring that up as a major issue. People don't want to hear it, but it's something that we need to talk about and do something about now before it's too late.
Well, I mean, for me, and I know this because of the United Kingdom, because the United Kingdom actually, with the Bank of England, was the world's first fractional reserve bank
Hmm.
back in 1609. And me personally, I think one of the most effective ways of starting the revolution, you could say, in
Hmm.
terms of making our Western world sustain towards the 22nd century,
Hmm.
is basically throwing under the bus fractional reserve banking, the Federal Reserve, and printing of money, and basically saying no, no more,
I agree.
no more to that whatsoever.
But the
Whereas if
problem,
you,
of course,
because
is we can't implement that because the people in power don't want that, because they are the ones at the top of that house of cards, and they don't want to fall down should we start
of
knocking it down.
for sure, but as the old saying goes, when shit hits the fan, and then people start getting desperate and start getting angry, they may end up realizing who's at fault, and they may come after those who did cause the problem.
I don't know how much of a
And
problem it is in the United Kingdom, but in America, the massive amounts of billions and in total trillions of dollars of bailouts to banking companies and investment companies that have happened in America is staggering, because
well, it,
that's why I say in America you have socialism for the rich and the connected to Washington, and then cutthroat capitalism for everyone else at the bottom.
oh yeah, yeah, I've definitely used that before, where neoliberalism is not capitalism but socialism for the rich.
It really
because
is,
you have
because
corporate welfare. You
when
have
you look
corporate
at it,
welfare.
Americans do not need Wall Street. We do not need these massive fat cats of investment bankers that are basically the pawns and the servitors of the Fed and the international money system. Those things should have collapsed. They should not have been bailed out. They should have failed as a business, and more modern, more applicable things would have risen to take their place, if anything took their place at all.
Yes, like I think I remember watching a video of this by Glenn Jacobs,
Mm-hmm.
who spoke about the 2008 recession, and he basically said that what happened was when then happened was there was 17, I think it was around 17 trillion pounds was basically created to bail out these banks, whereas the likes
Yes.
of Thomas Sowell said, if you just let them break, let them collapse, don't bail them out, someone else who didn't screw up would take over, and you would
Yes.
have a much better superior. So you could think of it as economic, or you could see it as economic natural selection.
And it goes back to what I say very often when it comes to the philosophy of state and the philosophy of economics is you get what you subsidize for. If you subsidize incompetent people who are nepotistic and corrupt at your top end, you are asking for more crony capitalism, not less. So eventually, that's all you will have at the top, and it will, of course, collapse.
Yes, whereas like in the United Kingdom, I know the US has around $21 trillion in debt
Yes.
as of right now, give or take.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the United Kingdom, we've currently got 2.2 trillion pounds worth of national debt. But here's the funny thing: the real debt spike started to happen at the turn of the 1970s.
Mm.
Whereas if you look into it prior to that, we had around, I think, 1972, if memory serves, when the United Kingdom made the treacherous decision to join the European Union. We had about 36 billion pounds worth of
I
national
think
debt.
I think this came up on the last unpopular opinions that I was on of Academic Agents channel. It was either that or the week that I missed after that. But he and
Yeah,
someone else brought up that exact thing you're talking about. Excuse me,
yeah.
in that discussion, where around the same time period in America with the National Consumer Act and the Credit Act of 1984 in America, you had a notable spike of national debt because of how the shell game of investments and debts and mortgages and that kind of thing started to shift towards the neoliberal, neoconservative power scale in the 70s and 80s.
Well, yeah. I mean, we could technically. I mean, I hate to be that person to lay all the blame on one person, but in terms of the United Kingdom, I could blame the vast majority of that on Margaret Thatcher.
And
And in
likewise,
terms of
in the same era, I could blame a lot of that on Ronald Reagan in the Reaganomics trickle-down era of the
yeah,
mid-1980s. Because almost
yeah, yeah. I
every
mean,
problem that we have now in America, I believe you can trace its roots to the massive swell of neolib, neocon power and the shell game shifting towards the mega-rich in the 1980s in America.
well, I would argue it goes back to the 70s because that's when the real push for globalization came about. Hence, why huge amounts of manufacturing industries, especially cities like Detroit,
Oh, I
end up
agree.
packing up and leaving, moving to.
I meant to pin it
Sorry.
on one man's name is what I meant.
Oh, Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, that's what I meant. I just meant you can, if you want to
Yeah, for
pin it to
sure.
one man, he was sort of the
Yeah.
man in charge of the country when all of that started to really blossom and come to a head
Oh,
from the
for sure, for
70s.
sure. And over here was Margaret Thatcher, although there
Hmm.
were economic problems with the communists and the so-called conservatives in the 70s.
Hmm.
But Margaret Thatcher basically turbocharged the neoliberalism
Yeah.
agenda up to
Hmm.
11.
Yeah, I
Hence
definitely
why,
remember
in terms,
because I watched a lot of Flying Circus growing up, and they had a lot
yeah.
of choice things to say about Thatcher.
Oh, no, no, no. Like me personally, even though, like for me, don't get me wrong, I
Hmm.
understand certain elements of her decisions, like
Yeah.
with the unions and that.
Hmm.
But the problem was that she basically turbocharged all the problems that were started to build up from the
Okay.
70s. She
Yeah.
basically, so if I were to use an automotive term, it's like taking a Mustang which has terrible brakes, it's like taking a 60s Mustang
Uh
and dumping in a Dodge Hellcat engine into it and driving.
huh.
It's not going to end well.
No.
It's not going to end well.
So moving back to topic, then, let's
Yeah,
talk
sorry.
about how. Do you believe that the one of the goals of that era of neoliberalism, neoconservatism, do you think that the powers that be foresaw an ever increasing number of people that needed welfare, and they saw a way to anchor them to real estate and to taxation to sort of keep the system afloat and to keep them rich? Or do you think it was completely accidental or just they were blind and careless?
Um, Given the types of people in question, I would argue this was deliberately set up from the very beginning to create a so-called slave state.
Yes, I'm of that mind too, because I refuse to
Yeah.
believe the people, especially the American neoconservative writers, the ones that I forget the senator's name, but the guy who wrote the paper that basically created the concept of the moral majority in America, that was, hey, let's tell all these idiot Southerners that don't vote that we are the party of God, and then they'll all vote for us, and we can push through whatever the hell that we want. That guy was kind of the father of neoconservatism in a way. I forget his name; it escapes me right now. But I think that paper was circulated in 1977, I believe. And I refuse to believe that people like him and the ones who wanted to push this stuff through Washington were clueless as to what they were doing. I think they knew exactly what the fallout was going to be, and they did it anyway.
Well, I mean, the main reason I say that, although, given some of the stupid shit politicians have said and done, I could also think they were being incredibly stupid and careless, or capricious, or
Possibly.
whatever
But I think that
adjective
they
you
knew
want
that
to
was a
use.
possibility and they didn't care because their party, their riches, and their children by that system would basically be the next generation of oligarchs. And then after that, they couldn't lose and it wouldn't matter.
Well, yeah, but like for instance, a lot of the neoliberalist economic systems, and even those of the more socialist types,
Hmm.
it's almost like they want to bring back the classic monarchy style of economic.
I have noticed that when talking to leftists, it seems like they definitely like the concept of a communist inner circle mixed with a English monarchy of leadership, so they will handle all of the challenging problems and absolve them of any true responsibility. And that is completely antithetical to classic liberalism and the concept of being an American to me.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Like even though I'm an Englishman, I'm about as American. I'm about as American as they come. But for
I
me,
think a lot of true Englishmen are, and that's why I think a lot of real Americans and real British get along so well.
sorry, say that again. Sorry.
I said I think that a lot of real Americans and real British agree on those things, and that's why so many of us get on so well together.
For sure, for sure. But like, I think for me, when it comes to this subject, I just feel like they could keep on going down. Like, for instance, with Thatcher,
Hmm.
we had the recession in '85. Then just after her reign, when that fucking monkey, John Major, took over,
Yeah,
we had
that
another
was before
recession.
Blair, right? The guy before Blair.
Yeah, yeah, the guy before Blair. And
Yeah.
in '92, we had another recession, which was known as Black Wednesday, where a certain Hungarian Jew named George Soros made £1 billion
Oh, gee, I wonder how that's
out of
related.
out of out of the Bank of England, and then
Hmm.
obviously Blair took over, pushed more Thatcherist economics, but with a blue skin over it,
Uh
as
huh.
people would say. And basically, we had the 2008 economic recession, which what
Uh
kind of
huh.
makes me laugh about the 2008 economic recession is the warning signs were there as far back as 2004, and no one reacted. No one saw it. No, there
I
were
think one of the
people
problems with
witnessing.
I think one of the problems with everything we're talking about is sort of like how the old adage of, hard times create strong men create good times, et cetera, et cetera. I think one of the problems
Yeah.
is not only has faith in the media dwindled, I think the reason the faith in the media dwindled is they needed to stay afloat, so they had to become more inflammatory to get people's attention because society in both England and America in the 70s and 80s was becoming so damn good, no one had a reason to care or keep an eye on the leadership because everyone was just living life, making babies, spending money, going into debt. Everybody was just living large and being mostly careless. And I think
I would.
that really gives a
I,
lot of power to those who will use the complacency of the masses to dramatically change up the system.
oh, for sure, but I
And,
would
and,
argue
and whether
that
it's
was
a
more.
neoliberal or a communist, they both can use that. And I think the complacency of the
I would
masses
say
is
with
what
the
has led us to
attitude
this.
of. I would say on the attitudes of having fun, spending money, going to dinner, and having babies. I would argue that was more the case after the war
The
than
boomer
maybe more
generation,
so
yes, definitely.
yeah, the proper boomer
Hmm.
generation compared to the '70s and '80s. Because
Well,
I
the
think for
70s
how it
and
was in
80s, I believe,
America,
I see a lot of that because of how heavily, in America anyway, just how marketable everything was in the 70s and early 80s. That's the dawn of commercials, the dawn of catchy commercials other than just, hey, buy our product, here's a smiling face and this is why you should buy it, to everything is extreme. Oh, get your attention. Look at these famous people, doing flips. Here, buy this gum, buy this car, all that stuff. Like, I really think that we saw, especially in the 70s, that was the dawn of powerful, manipulative mass marketing, in my opinion, in America. And I think that is definitely a sign of how good things are in a society and how little people care about war and economics and government, is because if their normal life is so good, they never have a reason to be afraid or feel like they need to care about the leadership, then they don't. And I think that the complacency of the masses is one of the reasons that the neocons and the neolibs sort of corporately took control of America in such a grandiose degree.
That's for sure. I mean, with the whole commercialization, I'd argue the swinging 60 was where it really kicked off, because that's where televisions became
Yes.
mostly available to average consumers.
And
And
also,
obviously, with
also
them,
telephones too. Telephones became huge, and that
yes,
really
and
connected
telephones,
people
yeah.
to, hey, here's a catalog. You can order things to your house, or hey, tell everyone in your community how wonderful this product is. You can phone up Betty and Susan and tell them how this house cleaner they should all buy, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's for sure. Whereas, like, compared to the United Kingdom, and since you brought up the media,
Mm-hmm.
the UK media generally has been considered for a long time complete and utter trash.
Yes.
Like, I'm not sure if you ever seen that clip with Yes Minister, which was a
I don't
comedy
know.
take on politics. Well, basically, it was a comedic takeover from the early '80s about how Parliament works. And there's the thing where they spoke about the media, where they said, "Oh, what's it called? I forget the exact line, but it goes something along the lines of." The Guardian's full of people who believe they should be running the country. The Telegraph is for people who actually run the country. The Financial Times is read by people who actually own the country. Well, what about the Sun? Oh, they don't care as long as the bird has big tits.
Yeah, I get it. I'm familiar enough with the
Yeah,
publications and the UK to get it.
yeah. And generally, like, there is plenty of truth in that very comedic
Mm-hmm.
take, because people who read the Sun don't actually give a damn what it says. They just care about who's the bird on page three.
Right.
And also the people who run the Sun, you cannot buy in Liverpool because of the smear piece they put on regarding Liverpool fans with the Hillsborough disaster in '98.
So,
No, it was
tying back
yeah,
into pension and welfare, let's get back on
yeah.
topic.
Sorry.
When it comes to what is, the facts of what is, I don't have the metrics in front of me and I'm not going to look it up,
Yeah,
but the facts of what is, eventually we're going to get to a point to where taxation is going to be the bulk of paying for everyone to live, even if America never does have a single payer tax, a single payer version of healthcare, even if America never has a version of the NHS, just on pension, retirement, and the way welfare works now, I believe in the next 2 generations, it's going to be more than half of what everyone has to pay in taxes. And in my opinion, that's already of an untenable amount, let alone what it'll be like 50 or 60 years from now. So,
oh, for sure, for
what
sure.
do you
Like,
think? Let's have some actual meat and potatoes of this discussion because we're
okay,
20
sure
minutes
thing.
in. What do you
Okay.
think should be done in your country to fight
Well,
this now?
well, in terms of the United Kingdom, one thing I would like them to do is fuck off the PFI contracts, which are basically shafting me as a taxpayer, national insurance competition, to
For
pay off these
myself and
private
other
contracts.
viewers, can you tell me what that is?
Oh, well, basically, during the Blair government,
Mm-hmm.
a bunch of PFI contracts, which were private contracts where elements of the NHS were sold off to private companies to provide services. However, what happened was they weren't necessarily given a damn about the services and were basically trying to make money out of the system itself.
Okay.
So basically, get all those see you next Thursdays, to put it politely,
Mm-hmm.
out of the system to begin with.
Okay.
Secondly of all, drastically reduce the amount of middle management we currently have in our NHS,
Okay.
which is clogging up elements of it.
You
Uh,
you mean administrators, not actual health care providers?
yes, actual like administrators and middle management. Seriously, just get rid of them.
Okay.
Get rid of them. They're just a block. Thirdly of all, try and, with the education system, produce a complete brand new generation of doctors, nurses, surgeons, whatever, so on and so forth, to basically effectively go, in a sense, from an economic standpoint, complete overkill in supply of doctors, nurses, and surgeons so it can catch up with the demand of the system itself. Fourthly of all, I wouldn't use the term fat shame or shaming people in terms of bad health styles, but try and make it such a social taboo, so that almost like how many years ago that being single and unmarried was a social taboo. Basically,
Yes.
so like, not saying you have to have a six pack. Everyone must have a six pack,
I
or
get
all
you.
women have to be a size 6. But
I
just
agree.
be a much more effective with your health. Secondly of all, when I speak about using a sick resource, don't turn up to A&E for something really stupid, like a nosebleed, something like that. No,
Yeah.
don't turn up for something like that. Treat it as a sacred resource. And also, another thing I would say, maybe if a lot of people in the public were properly trained in first aid and Dr. ABC, so therefore you could take stress away from the NHS itself, so they could deal with the big issues such as people with broken legs or losing blood, stuff like that.
Something that's not directly involved in this topic, but something that several of the things that you just talked about, especially training more nurses and doctors, I know that this would apply in the United Kingdom as well as America. I believe that the neocon, neolib, globalist, socialist, whatever you want to call it, twist that has happened has completely destroyed nationalized education, because no longer in schools are people taught what they need to live a productive life, if anything at all. And I'm not saying that public schools were once great. I don't think they were ever great. But I think that the way that public schools work now is a complete and utter failure. I think that things like first aid, basics of economics and trade, basics of why we have a government, why it's based on the ethics that it is, and you need to be trained on the why, not the what, in school, because we need young people being taught how and why they can be active, contributing members of society, and why that will make them happy and fulfilled. But I think schools teach the opposite of that, and at the same time, they don't even teach them the what that they need to know about how to manage finances, how to get a good job, how to analyze the work market, how to analyze and market your intellectual skills. I don't think schools teach that at all, and I definitely don't think universities teach you that. So I think that a lot of what you and I would like to see done in regards to welfare state, social security, welfare benefits, I think we would see better overall health, which would of course be a less burden on the taxpayer, better overall decisions with how to live a life, how to market your labor, and how to use the money of that labor. I think that if we start teaching our generations to come all of these useful tools, we will see a dramatic improvement in everything that we're talking about in regards to this topic.
Absolutely. I mean, for me, like, obviously with my academic backgrounds, I specialized in motorsport engineering, and they are unbelievably ruthless in terms of quality,
You specialize in what kind of
time,
engineering? Say again, please.
motorsport engineering.
Oh, I see.
So they are the absolute pinnacle of standards when it comes to quality, engineering,
So you're talking about someone who
innovation.
would work on an innovative team to build better engines and braking systems for things like F1 and Grand Prix.
Say that again, sorry?
So you're talking about the profession of engineers that would work on the systems for vehicles in F1 and Grand Prix? That's what you're talking about?
Yes, basically, because to give a slight bit of history, where I live in England, I live in the center of what is known as Motorsport Valley. Now, you've heard of Silicon Valley?
That's in Oxford, correct?
That's in the Oxfordshire area, but we're in the center of it.
Okay.
It goes as far west as Bristol and as far east as Woking.
I'm not as familiar with English geography as I would like to be. Sorry.
Okay, so basically, Woking is just southwest of London, and Bristol is pretty far west, just below the border of Wales.
Okay, so please continue.
So in this little hub is the area known as Motorsport Valley. And this is where the absolute cream of the cream of the top of engineers, designers, mechanics, etc., all live in this one area.
So it is like Silicon Valley.
Yes, and to put it bluntly, to describe how powerful this little valley is, which employs around 40,000 people, if you were to take a team with the best in Motorsport Valley against the best in the United States, Japan, Germany, France, Australia, etc., and made a global super team against Motorsport Valley, they would still lose.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so seven of the majority F1 teams are based in this island. The vast majority of engineers who work in this industry are based in this island, and I'm not even joking. Even the top guys in America, they employ a lot of staff in companies from England because of our history and dominance of this industry.
So go on with what you were saying about education then.
So basically, and because of what I had to learn, you had to learn all the various skills in question. You learned them to a very high degree, and you had to demonstrate you can do these skills. So, for instance, when we did engines, you had to know every single part of the engine. You had to know your Lambda formulas. You had to know your compression ratios, bore and stroke, for displacement, how to take it apart, how to put it together, and how to solve a problem.
All right.
And I was trained by tried and trusted professionals from the tops of Formula One, British Aerospace, etc., and it did not compromise.
Okay.
Now, with that, it teaches you how to think on your feet, how to be fast, and how to be reactive. And they don't compromise, unlike what I see across, even at school, how they constantly compromise against to the lowest standards.
Yes.
At college,
That's
they were
a common
like,
thing.
this is the grade. This is the grade. You either pass it or you fail. No exception.
That's
because
a thing
in that industry.
Go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Because in that industry, they are unbelievably ruthless for tolerances. Because if somebody dies in a car or a plane that you built, you are going to be taken to the courtrooms and potentially be charged with industrial manslaughter.
Okay.
That's how brutal the tolerance standards are.
A lot of the people in America that believe we need massive changes to our system when it comes to education, we often get called heartless or sometimes racist, but not as often because we are oftentimes against affirmative action. But the core of being against things like affirmative action stems from we understand there needs to be a very regimented hierarchy of performance, knowledge, and capability, because the way that the public school systems have become, especially with No Child Left Behind and all that mess, affirmative action and everything in America.
I'm aware of that.
The sad truth is the bar of education and the bar of competence has been lowered and homogenized to such a degree where even if teachers are like me and want to force children to learn and to be good and to teach them that the ramifications of their action matter and can lead to very unpleasant results if they don't meet a certain bar, we aren't even allowed to professionally in most cases. And so what you have is a ever worsening rot to your society because you have people growing up not being taught with any level of enforcement the necessity of social hierarchy. And regardless of what a Marxist or a bleeding heart liberal wants to think about society, human life is a cutthroat hierarchy. You sink or swim. And the lower that we make the bar and the less that we enforce that very real concept into children, the weaker and the worse the next generation will be. And in the end, you're doing everyone a disservice by not enforcing that upon your young people.
Exactly, and not just with that. Another example is with this industry that I studied in. Even the people at the back of the class were still challenged to step up and do better.
Yes.
There was a almost ruthless competition.
Instead of in core education, where the weakest and the dumbest are often given a pass or given bonus credit, or just pass for no reason.
Exactly. It wasn't a case of No Child Left Behind. It was basically, this guy's the best, or you step up and try and beat him. And you encourage a sense of competition.
And culturally, that was enforced not by the stick so much as it was the carrot, I imagine, because the instructors and the other people, while I'm sure that a certain amount of braggatry and dick measuring happens, I'm assuming that everyone that was involved in instruction and education, they didn't want to shame the worst in the class. They wanted them to step up and light a fire in them to do better, correct?
Yes, because it's a genuine test of character.
Mm-hmm.
Because in my industry, it is unbelievably ruthless.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and in terms of research and development, to give you some perspective,
Mm-hmm.
pharmaceutical companies spend about 8% of their revenue on research and development. No, sorry, it's 15%. Sorry,
I was going to say that
automotive
sounded pretty
test.
low. Like in America, it's
Yeah,
probably
yeah. So
20%. It's probably a lot.
yeah. Pharmaceutical, from my understanding, is about 15%.
Okay.
In terms of the military industrial complex, it's about 8%. The
Okay.
automotive sector is about 4%. The motorsport industry spends 30% of
Wow.
its income on research and development.
Interesting.
30%, which is outrageously high.
Mm-hmm.
And the amount of technological advancements we've made is
Mm-hmm.
freaking huge. And we've also doing this while
Like,
having to deal with
I would
all the
imagine a good
politics.
American. I'm sorry. I would imagine a good
Sorry.
American example of that would be how during the space race, how NASA was like that, and that's why so many
Yeah.
technological and hard science innovations came from NASA between the 50s and the 70s.
Well, yeah. Like the entire
Mm-hmm.
motorsport industry, it follows the same principles the arms race and the World War
Mm-hmm.
II and the aerospace industry.
Yeah.
Make something as light as possible, make something as strong as possible, make something as fast as possible, make something. It's all about taking something and just aiming for the stars and
Mm-hmm.
trying to hit the moon. It's that same mentality of
And
no standing still.
And
We always
unfortunately,
want
in
more.
core education and basic college education, which I think you would call basic university over there, unfortunately, the opposite of that is implemented, which is everyone
Yes.
aims for the bell curve and to be as normal and as passing as possible, and anything
No.
beyond that is unnecessary. So I think that we need to have not just a governmental systemic change, but a cultural shift back towards how things were in the previous generations, where you had families and teachers, educators, businessmen actually enforcing a sink or swim carrot and stick of look how good you need to be. You need to be a cut above the rest. Don't just settle for being A, B, or C. You need, like, if you push the need for everyone to excel, obviously not everyone can excel. And the problem is the last two generations ushered in the cultural norm of it is unacceptable to fail. It is unacceptable to aim high and fail. And I think that is to the detriment of our entire society. And I really think that needs to change.
Well, yes, but it's like the old saying goes: if you don't aim high, what are you aiming for? Like, for example, it's like you were saying about dropping down the standards. All it's going to do is you're going to take those who have aspirations and who are intelligent. They're naturally going to they're naturally going to just reject the system and actually pull out.
Mm-hmm.
That's what happens, and
That's
this is
why.
common.
That's why, in
Whereas,
my opinion, most of the successful business owners and people that go their own way and make their own money, like Tim Pool's a good example, they chose to bail out of this shoddy educational system because they didn't miss the forest for the trees. They saw the forest and they said, "Hey, everyone's stuck in this forest, but if I move to the edge of the forest, I can find my own patch of land and then I can cut down these trees and sell them for whatever the hell I want." And I think
well, exactly.
that's where a lot of your smart entrepreneurial hierarchical minded people end up. That's why a lot of us, like me, for example, I bailed out of college. I gave up on high school my last year. I was like, this is total shit. I'm not learning anything. This is stupid. And then I just went to work full time, and I've been working and making my own money ever since, and I've been very successful. And I think that if I would have
Yeah.
stayed in and tried to get an education degree or tried to become part of, since I love philosophy and education, I think that I would have had a much harder, less fulfilling life if I would have just tried to be a teacher or be part of the machine. I probably would have ended up, miserable and empty and broke or whatever.
Well, yeah, that is true. But also, I think it was like the likes of Elon Musk said it. The top people, it doesn't matter if you're an A class student, you're going to be working for a C class student.
If you're A
And trying to
class what?
explain
I'm
that to
sorry,
people,
say again. I accidentally knocked
if
the
you're an
bottle
A
over and made a
plus,
noise.
sorry, if you're an A plus student,
Mhm.
you won't be running a company. You'll be working for a company manager who's a C grade student,
Yeah, exactly. That's
as
a
he
good
explained
point.
it.
Yeah.
And
And
and people and you try and explain to people like, what do you mean by a C grade student? So simple. A C grade student is someone who's maybe not so be the best person in the class, but someone who is literally who basically rejected the
and
class.
even for people like me who were older, because I'm a
Yeah.
good generation older than you, even coming up in the 80s, they weren't telling us to be a business entrepreneur, to start a business. They weren't telling us to, like in school, for example, even up through high school, they weren't telling us this is what the market's like. You can do this and cut your teeth in the market. You can create this good, this service. They were telling us, learn to take this test. Learn to say yes. Learn to be part of the system. Learn to jump through these hoops to make this employer happy so you can get a reliable job that gives you benefits and investments and everything, and you want a comfortable 40-hour-a-week job in an office building where you don't have a care in the world. And I think that that was to the great detriment of my generation and the millennials that came after me.
Well, also that is true, but also another thing which you also had was the little thing concept as networking and networking in a
Mm-hmm.
sense, because also what people also seem to forget is it's not necessarily what you know, it's who you know.
Mm-hmm.
You could be let's say an 80 IQ individual, but if you know all the right people, you're laughing. You
Mm-hmm.
could be a person who's got an IQ of 160, but if you
Mm-hmm.
know nobody,
Exactly.
you're fairly screwed.
Yeah, like
So
a bell curve 100 IQ person that comes from a fairly poor family, if they go out of their way to make friends in their city and know police officers and know people that work for public transit, they can probably reliably get work for the city or the state or whatever just through the people they know and have enough money to pay for a wife and children, as opposed to someone
exactly.
who's got an IQ of 140 and is, just goes balls to the wall with computer programming or whatever. They end up being 22 years old, knowing no one, having no connections and no community, and are therefore they have a much greater challenge at making enough money not only for themselves but to have a family.
Well, that's true. But like also, as other people pointed out, a lot of people dropped out and went into the world of crime, and especially in the
Mm-hmm.
60s, 70s, and 80s, you could make a lot of money because there wasn't much of in the sense of competition,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what a lot of people do, especially in drugs and
Mm-hmm.
carjacking, and a lot of people made a lot of money and then cleaned
Mm-hmm.
their black money into white money into the housing market.
Well, let's move back to the topic. What we
So
just
yeah,
talked about with education and
yeah,
a removal of a societal norm of good health, looking good, being fit, raising children, having a
yes,
good wife or husband, wanting to
yeah,
contribute to something other than just playing video games and having a cat and watching funny videos on YouTube being the end goal.
yeah,
I think that we're
yeah,
going to see the millennial generation and for also my generation, the later Gen Xers, because I'm a late Gen Xer, I'm only
yeah.
40.
I can understand.
Seeing us now, we are very much in the pocket of corporations and government, where the ones that came before us didn't necessarily have to be; they chose to be. It's much harder now when you go through primary school and you go into a regular college or even a university. Almost nothing about that system teaches you there is another way. They basically groom you to be a productive drone of the corporate state. And I think that that is dynamically going to cause the Social Security, welfare, end of life thing to collapse even more, because you're going to have all of these people, these millions of Americans. Excuse me, I had to burp. You're going to have these
No
millions of
worries.
Americans that are getting older. They might, because of how good healthcare has been, if they have good lucks with genetics and they've taken care of themselves, they might not be a very strong net contributor economically to society, but they might live to be 90 or 100 years old. And the retirement age, even if it gets raised to 70 or 75, that's still 25 years that they're going to have to live on someone else's dime. And I think
Exactly.
I think that we have to start instilling within people a an a ideological need to provide for yourself for your entire life. We have to start teaching people investments, how you can start putting away just $20 a paycheck, just $50 a paycheck from the time you're a young adult, because that turns into millions of dollars when you're 70 years old. And then you don't need the taxpayers to take care of you. And I really think that
Yes,
it's going to have to start with a social shift. No politician I vote for is going to change this, because they are going to be part of the current system. And they say that
Fish.
politics is downstream from culture. So we have to start changing the culture and raising cultural norms back to what they were in the 50s and 60s in this particular regard, not in other regards, because I think a lot
Yeah.
of progressivism has been good, but that's a different topic.
Yes.
But anyway, I
Yeah.
know that
But
I talked a great deal about that. So, do you have something
yeah.
on the specific topic of today to move on to now?
Well, I kind of want to go back to what I was saying about the education system, about training doctors and nurses and
Please,
surgeons.
please do that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, as what the point I was trying to make with my academic background is, if you were to, let's say, with the education system, have a complete major shift away from, let's say, a lot of the so-called social science, media studies and stuff, and had
Mm-hmm.
a massive focus on purely STEM,
Mm-hmm.
science, technology, engineering,
Yeah.
mathematics, and you went complete overkill in that sector, you produce an entire generation of engineers, technicians, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And when you flood the market with that many people, especially, well, I really need this in the United Kingdom with the NHS, when you overfill that, all the hospitals are going to be fully staffed to the T. So if
Mm-hmm.
anything major happens, you're well and truly secure in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
And with the future of the automation coming, because we're currently in what is known as the fourth uh, industrial revolution,
Mm-hmm.
it's coming whether we like it or not, and we
Right.
have to be ready from a
Mm-hmm.
state side to be able to provide for that. Because
And you would
people don't
rather
know
have a
about.
population of people that are STEM trained instead of a population of people that have, gender science degrees.
Sorry, say that again.
I said, so you will want for that in upcoming technological evolution, you're going to want a populace trained in STEM, not a populace trained in social studies and being counselors and gender studies.
Exactly, because because there's going to be a huge demand for those industry.
Mm.
I know this because in my world, we've been pushing for a lot more automation. Hell, like very recently, we've started. There's been pushes towards automation regarding production of materials such as carbon fiber.
Mm-hmm.
Once that's very recently been cracked, although it's at the early stages. But when that becomes mass produced, that's going to send huge shockwaves in the engineering systems in aerospace and
Definitely.
automotive.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also
Not to mention working
things
class
like.
jobs, because with the spike
Exactly.
with the spike of technological growth, it's going to be a lot more challenging, especially for truck drivers, assembly line workers, people that work in factories, people that
Yeah,
do even basic retail is going to eventually be replaced by tablets with AI.
yeah, but actually, funny. Funny you mentioned truck drivers because I do remember a debate between. You might have seen it, Ben Shapiro and Tucker Carlson,
Yes, I did listen to that.
where he
Didn't
spoke
watch it,
about
but I listened to
when
it.
he spoke when he spoke about truck driving.
Hmm.
It's funny you mentioned that. One of the things I'd argued that the United Kingdom and even the United States needs to impute, and this kind of goes into the immigration aspect.
Hmm.
You kind of want to have this table stacked very much in favor of the working class in the sense that there's
Yes,
more jobs
yes,
versus labor.
right.
And especially with the push for especially with the expansion of AI and self-driving stuff like that, you want to stack it even more in favor in terms of the working class side. So
Right.
therefore, the companies are basically stranglehold in a sense to offer even better wages and better
Right,
working benefits.
because even though the massive contributors to tax money are middle class and upper class, the massive contributors to the workforce and to the ones who give birth to the up and coming middle class are the lower working classes. So you want them
Exactly.
to have the deck stacked in their favor because they are from what all comes in the future.
Yes. So, like for instance, in my well, what I did study in, because there is so much demand, is that when it came to, let's say, the aftermath of the recession,
Hmm.
a lot of places were losing work in that sense. But in terms of the skills matrix, especially if you was an old timer,
Hmm.
it wasn't too hard to find work. So if you was a qualified welder, you might find somewhere to weld, maybe not the same money,
Hmm.
maybe a bit less, but you could still get by. Whereas a lot of the youngsters who are trying to come in, we're basically trying to punch through basically polycarbonate with our bare fists. And you have to have one hell of a punch to try and break that in a
Yeah.
sense. So you have that problem, and also like you were saying about welfare. One thing I would also advocate in the United Kingdom, which they're kind of pushing, but not really very well because they're kind of shafting over, is trying to help those who are doing quite well off to get them on private pension. So that way, that when it comes to retirement, they have their own pension saved up, so they don't need to rely on the state pension.
Hmm. I agree.
So in that
Excuse me.
So in a sense, this is where, like I say, you treat it like a sacred good. As in, if you don't require
So,
it, then you kind of naturally segregate or ostracize yourself out of that aspect itself,
okay,
if that makes
these
sense.
these ideas that we have are all well and good. So, when it comes to the United Kingdom and when it comes to America, where I live,
Yeah,
what do you think that you and I, in our lives right now, what can we
yeah,
do to help usher in these changes? I say paying close attention to who you vote for in local elections matters the most, and how you
Well,
contribute and how
yeah.
you contribute to the community around you matters most. And for people like me who can't have children or who just don't want to have children, I think that we should be active with any type of local community we can get a hold of. Maybe volunteer to, you know, talk at schools or be a part of youth groups at church, that kind of things, to where we can give these good ideas, plant the seed of these good ideas into the mind of the youth in the next coming generation. That's just what
Well,
comes
yeah.
to mind to me, and that's why I enjoy being a YouTube pedagogue, even though I don't have many followers yet, is because I want
Yeah.
these good ideas to be planted in people that are young or implanted in people who are going to be raising the young of the upcoming generations. So the ball's in your court now. What do you think that you and I can do in the here and now to help usher in these good ideas and changes?
Well, I mean, funny you mentioned votes because obviously we had our recent election. Me, I
Mm-hmm.
always spoil my vote because the
Mm-hmm.
only person I'd argue should run the United Kingdom is myself and myself only. But for instance, like with my job, I am very clear on letting my fellow workers know about their rights regarding unions and stuff like that. Hence
Mm-hmm.
why my employers really do not like me, but they can't fire me.
I do think unions have their place. I'm not completely sold on there
Yeah.
being ubiquitous unions, but I do think they have their
No, no,
place.
like I don't have an issue with unions per se, but I don't, let's say with the United Kingdom, I don't want the unions like we had in the 70s, which was striking like crazy.
Yeah.
I would, let's say like what I looked through from an outsider's perspective, the sort of unions you have in places like Switzerland are an ideal model to follow, whereas like they represent the workers' interests, but they're not socialist in their thinking, they're very capitalist in their thinking. So, for example, in Switzerland, I do remember they actually rejected the $25 minimum wage.
A lot
They
of
outright
the
rejected it outright.
a lot of the people that I hear speak about unions in America say that the unions are a mixed
Yeah.
bag here, but the largest unions aren't very socialist. They're very capitalist, where they don't want fixed wages. They want the ability to argue and make demands for certain benefits, wage differentials, and that sort of thing as they see fit. So I don't have a
Yes.
firm opinion on unions because I'm very poorly studied on them in America. I've never had to deal with them personally.
Oh.
So
Well, I
I
mean,
can't say anything beyond that.
I have quite a good amount of experience because I'm actually a part of a union,
Okay.
and the union has helped me in certain aspects, and I've also helped them regarding my knowledge on certain elements of UK law and materials and stuff like that. So it's kind of a very helpful
Okay.
I want to use
Well,
coalition, but
I want to
companionship
guide you
between.
back. I want to guide you back to my
Yeah,
question
sorry,
of
go ahead, just
tell
sorry.
me what you can do in the here and now. You started off with talking about the election, so please continue on from there.
Yeah. Well, another thing is like regarding Brexit, which is the biggest talking point in the United Kingdom. I've done my best to try and explain to people a lot of things that the media are not talking about.
I do that too with the
So for
people in my life. I'm a professional driver,
so
by the
for
way. I drive a
fair
city
enough,
bus and I drive medical transport. I do a split job for the
fair
city,
enough.
and
Well, I
most
mean,
of and the people that I talk to oftentimes want to talk about what's in the media or politics, and with a very
yeah,
even keel, I do my best to let them know the truth and not what the media lies about. So I understand.
yeah, yeah. Well, like for instance, when it comes to Brexit, which one I tend to bring up a lot of subjects which no one in the media or anyone on either Remain or Leave wanted to talk about. So, for example, no one wanted to talk about the fact that we how we joined it, whether it was constitutionally illegal or not.
Hmm.
Which, to the best of my knowledge, I couldn't find definitively if it was illegal or not. And I tried asking a friend of mine who did have a top solicitor who wanted to look into it, but sadly ended up passing away due to stress because he was doing some
Good.
very high profile cases in America.
I bet that would be stressful.
No, 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 like the sort of people I didn't find the guy's name, but his list of clients are some of the most wealthiest and most influential people in terms of business there are around.
Well,
Like I
regardless, please
know,
continue.
yeah. So there's that. Where our money's being spent, for instance, in terms of like governmental budgets, how much we're getting ripped off in
Hmm.
terms of like foreign aid and stuff like that. What else is there? How much debt there is, how our currency is being devalued, and trying to help people realize how much we're getting shafted, and then for them maybe to start passing the word on to the point where the words get spread around, and there could be I wouldn't say demands of a revolution, but there would
Hmm.
be an uproar of of anger to demand action, saying, "Roy, what the hell is this?"
Yeah, I agree.
But the problem is nowadays.
As
But the
much as
problem
we
is
like to,
nowadays.
as much as people in America like to talk about the Boogaloo, I don't think that we're going to see an American Civil War, and I don't think that we need to have a radical
Well,
revolution to get the changes done that we want, because if you look at the way that the election just went in the UK as a marker, I think that we're going to
yeah.
see a swell of common sense people, whether right leaning or left leaning, really starting to care about politics, really starting to care about, hey, what exactly are these asshats that lead our country doing with our money? Maybe we should have more of a say in this. I think that we're going to see in the next generation, at least I hope so anyway, maybe a
Yeah.
way to, without revolution, start seeing a change in the way big picture policies are implemented. At least I hope so anyway.
Well, I mean, I'd love to have so much optimism, but I'm maybe I'm too pessimistic for my own good as a young man.
Well, you are
I
English
forget
too.
who. Well, I forget who said it best. Was that well? There is an element of plucky optimism with the British or the English. So, I mean, I forget who said it was. If you're an optimist before you're 40, by the time you reach 48, you know too little. If you're a pessimist beforehand, you know too much. So, I think, I mean, for
sounds like
me
something that
personally,
sounds like something that would be ascribed to Churchill, even if he said it or not.
no, it wasn't Churchill. I forget who it was. It might have been Mark Twain. I can't remember. But
Could have been. Could have been. He said a lot of
yeah, because
clever
he did
things.
have some. No, he did say a lot of hilarious things. But
Mhm.
for me, I think with Boris Johnson, I do not trust for 1 minute. I do not trust him at all with dealing with Brexit. I do not
I don't
trust him
either,
1 minute.
because his deal is similar to the Checkers deal, which is a farce.
Yeah, which I mean, me personally, is like what kind of made me laugh was when I was arguing with Remainers who tried saying, "Oh, this is the best. The standard deal was the best deal." I'm
Hmm.
like, how is it? How is this the best deal?
In
Like,
my
have you actually
opinion,
considered what makes it so good?
right? In my opinion, I know that this is might be considered radical by a lot of the UK listeners we might have, but
Yeah,
in light of how the last 2 years of EU have treated excuse me, have treated Theresa May and the things that the mouthpieces of the EU, like Guy Verhofstadt, have said about England, I
yeah,
believe that the leadership of the UK should write up a completely UK favorable deal that does not immediately give the EU the shaft and offers minor concessions to the EU, but is not at all like the current deal or the Checkers deal. Take it to Brussels and say, this is a very generous deal. And if you don't want to take this deal, you can get fucked because you're backbiting, sniveling pieces of shit that want to, wring the neck of the goose that lays the golden egg for you. How dare you, sir? And if they say, we will not take this deal, the UK leadership should tell them to get fucked and immediately have a no deal Brexit. That is what they should do. That is how it should be negotiated.
Well, I would agree with you, but I would throw a little curveball on this, and I know this from personal experience from being in a courtroom dealing
Okay.
with a multinational corporation.
Okay.
How I would have gone about the negotiation is I wouldn't have had the referendum to begin with.
Mm.
I would instead have, well, because for instance, as I found out when I was researching this for the last 5 years, I found this little thing called the 1972 European Communities Act,
Okay.
which was an act of law which was passed when Ted Heath, that dirty paedophile traitor,
Hmm.
well, supposed paedophile traitor, signed us up to
Allegedly.
what is known as, yeah, allegedly, but definitely a traitor, but allegedly a paedophile. Um, he signed us up to a little thing known as the Treaty of Accession, the
Okay.
1972 Treaty of Accession,
I'm
and that
unfamiliar.
basically, well, basically, it was a treaty which made the UK join the EEC, as it was known at the time,
I remember that.
and yeah, and Ireland did the same thing,
It was the
and
European Commerce
the
Commission, wasn't it? Isn't that what this stood for?
European Economic Community or something along those lines.
Yeah, community. That's what it was.
But right, and basically, this act basically said that European law would reign supreme over UK law. So if there was a conflict, EU law and UK law, EU law reigns supreme.
Okay.
Now I could tell you a very
I
hilarious
think I remember
scenario of
Nigel
this.
Farage talking about that in one of his rants.
Yeah, I think he did, but really it was his colleague at the time, former leader Gerard Batten, who really spoke about this a lot about
Maybe it was
5 or
him,
so
because I've
years
listened to a
ago.
lot of Jared Batten in the last year as well.
Yeah, he really went into details of this, not less so than Farage. He just made sure that Jared Batten was very clear about the legal aspect. He was
Okay.
much more on the nose in that sense.
But go
And for
on.
me, if I was the leader of the United Kingdom, if I wanted to have no deal Brexit, I just revoked that act and we would have no deal Brexit just like that.
Okay.
Because effectively, what you've done is just ripped up the initial contract. And once
Which,
the
of course,
contract
is
is
within
ripped,
Parliament's ability to do if they want.
yes, because ultimately you had that treaty, and then you had all the various treaties on top of that, such as the Amsterdam Treaty, the Maastricht Treaty, the Lisbon Treaty, the Nice
Okay.
Treaty,
Well,
etc.,
then,
etc.
then let me ask you, why is
Yeah.
that not the avenue through which they are going to have a Brexit?
Sorry, say that again.
Why is removing that piece of legislation not the avenue through which you are having a Brexit? Because to me, it seems like that would be the avenue
Okay.
you would take.
Okay. I could. This is my suspicion, and then again, I'm taking this just basically on my knowledge of UK politics and knowing of how politicians think over it. Either because A, they don't want to go with that system, or B, because they're ignorant about that thing to begin with.
Okay.
Like, for example, when that whole Ben Act came in, you might have heard about it, which stated that UK cannot leave without a deal.
Mm-hmm.
Technically speaking, that act was worthless because Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty supersedes it, thanks
Interesting.
to the 1972 European Communities Act. Now, when I try telling people, saying this is the reality of it, here's the data points, when they said to him, now, in order for your act to make it legally valid, you'd have to get rid of the 1972 ECA. But when they advocated for that, they ended up bypassing that whole thing altogether, and they got no deal Brexit, which is what they didn't want.
Interesting. Okay.
So that's
So,
the hilarious thing about the legal side of things.
so
And to be
we
honest,
got
most of my
sidetracked with
politics,
Brexit. We got sidetracked with Brexit.
yeah,
Going back to
sorry,
what we can do in the
yeah,
current climate of what
yes,
is, not what could be or what could have been.
yeah.
What else do you think we can do to fight against the economic house of cards that will collapse? What can we do in the here and now? Anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I mean, dare I say, take a leaf out of the mainstream media and then push effective good smear campaigns against certain corporations.
You mean become our own dirty, dirty smear merchants?
Well, the difference is we wouldn't be smear merchants because we'd be telling the truth.
You mean truth merchants, aggressive truth merchants?
Yes, so kind of like what Ricky Gervais did with Tim Cook of Apple, although I don't
Oh
think with
yeah.
that speech he really went in hard enough.
No,
I mean, me,
the
if I was on stage, I would have went
as much as the socialites and the lefty elites acted like
white suburbanites.
yeah, as much as they acted like he faux pawed, I thought that his delivery was very soft and kid gloved because I would have been much more savage.
Oh, I mean, it was the same with what's his face, Carl Benjamin, aka Sargon of Akkad, when he was talking to the media about Jeff Phillips. I mean, me
Hmm.
personally, I would have gone even further, and I would have basically just literally ripped her apart
Well, he
in
did
front
call
of
her
the
a
media
massive
of a
bitch. That
character.
was pretty rough.
Oh no, 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 no! I would have gone far worse. I would have gone far worse, and I would have literally, through the media, effectively destroyed her character and made her a complete butt of the joke.
Mm.
I would have
Well, maybe
regarded
we'll see
everything
more of
from
that
the
upcoming because I think that if what we have seen recently with Trump, with the way the vote went in the UK, with how the 2020 American political race is shaping up, I think we're going to start seeing a massive backlash against the elitist power structure. And I hope that that alone, especially with how Gen Z is the first generation that has since ever to notably move a tiny tick away from leftism, maybe we're going to see a little bit of reform. So I am hopeful.
well, I
I
mean,
am hopeful that people like me and you and all the others on YouTube and everywhere else that are pushing sensible ideas, I hope that they're going to matter, and I hope that the future will be a little better because of all that.
for me, it's what would especially help. I mean, Trump definitely did help with this. Is that if you had someone like I don't know, Elon Musk, if he went balls to the wall against left wing ideologies and just kept doing it over and over and over again for like a straight year, literally you could end up shifting an entire demographic against the
Mm-hmm.
our enemies in the left
I agree.
just by doing so because he has that much political clout.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is that part of the reason why Trump got elected is that early on he was going against his competitors and just constantly
Mm-hmm.
giving them something to beat them with, and he just kept doing it again and
Definitely.
again and again,
One of
repeatedly,
the
day after day, with consistent. Like
one
with
of
Jeb
the
Bush, he called him the low energy candidate, and he kept saying it
exactly.
over and over and over again.
One of the things that made Trump so successful, in my opinion, was how he would create nicknames for people, or he would create little talking
Yeah,
points about Pelosi or whoever else or Hillary Clinton, and keep hammering in these catchy and often humorous little catchphrases or nicknames for people because the masses love that. They want a
oh yeah,
more congenial, approachable, understandable person to get behind, whether it's a politician or a public figure. And even though Trump was born rich and he's, probably a scrupulous businessman and arguably a sociopath, that doesn't mean that he can't be a useful tool of the people. And I think that
oh yeah,
even though I wouldn't personally trust Trump as far as I could throw him, I do think that he
for
was
sure.
the voice and sort of the figurehead that the regular American needed at the time. And I think that's why he won.
Oh well, not just that, but obviously the thing is what obviously I was watching this quite closely from an English perspective, from an outsider's perspective. But what he did was he did something quite crafty,
Hmm.
and this is known for many aspects in politics. And I know this from basically from through the world of school and all that, and also debate. Is to make somebody the butt of the joke. Is to make somebody an enemy or a butt of a joke, and keep on repeating,
Hmm.
keep on repeating it to the point where not necessarily you're using the elements of propaganda what Joseph Goebbels was using,
Right.
but let's say for example, if let's say hypothetically, right, I say fuck this, I'm going to get in the world of politics, and basically I shit on Labour and become the lead. Okay, hypothetically,
Hmm.
if I wanted to go up against Boris Johnson, I'd have to play his Brexit game, but just play it better than it.
Hmm.
So, for example, if I was going up against Boris in the debate, I say if he's truly a patriotic Brit, I question him, why does he keep on pushing all these policies and make people question his patriotism and let him see his example, see
Hmm.
him try and defend himself.
Right. The
So effectively, you're like setting up traps.
Right. What you're talking about is what the media does to people like us and to dissenting voices. They often use this is what I call spin. We live in the age of spin because of the information age. So you'll see what they did to Tommy Robinson, for example. Oh, I said the name that should not be
I mean,
named, so automatically
yeah, yeah,
demonetized. You know,
yeah, yeah.
every time
So
he comes up, they use.
when it comes to
Let me
him,
let me
let's
finish. Let me finish for a second.
sorry,
Just
sorry,
using him as a UK example, the media will
yeah,
pick a phrase. They use power word true name, Yaxley Lennon. They will use his connection to far right neo Nazis. They will use words over and over and over again, like far right, right wing. And they use these little words just like Trump used nicknames and jokes over and over again to sort of paint a us versus them narrative. That's not really propaganda, that's spin. I call that spin, and I think that we live in the age of
yeah.
spin, where spin is more powerful than truth. And I think that if
Well,
people on quote unquote our side of things, like maybe an Elon Musk, for example, can use the
yeah.
age of spin in our favor by, like you said, using his platform and his wealth to just take a dump on these idiot socialists and vapid leftists that really don't care about people. They just do it for, social brownie points or whatever. And if they use
Yeah.
that and harp on it over and over again, like Trump did against Hillary in his campaign, I think we could see a peaceful, non revolutionary shift more towards normalcy.
Well, for sure, for sure. But like I said, it's like if you want to play this game, you've got to be prepared to get your hands dirty. And for
Mm-hmm.
me, when it comes to this type of world, I know exactly how to get under somebody else's skin, live in their brains, and just constantly tickle them all day long. Because I know how to get under people's nose, under their skin. Know how to constantly play at them and make and show them for who they truly are. So when it comes to Carl Benjamin with Jess Phillips, I would have literally socially destroyed her to the point where she couldn't even show her face.
And then every time you
Like
had the
not
opportunity, you would keep bringing that up again just to perpetuate it.
oh yeah, but like I said, like
Mm-hmm.
I'm very good at throwing people on the bus if I need to.
Okay.
So like when he's talking about the dirty smear merchants, like I mean, like a good example is like when he's talking about the dirty smear merchants, it's like I trust you in the media about as much as I trust a paedophile locked in a children's hospital. But hey, the BBC know all about trusting paedophiles with children now, don't they?
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way to.
The silent.
Mm-hmm.
No, because you've got to say an honest truth about them. You've got to say in such a cold, ruthless sense, and
I
everyone's
agree.
going to think, "Oh shit, he went there."
That's why I
Like
think
for
Ricky.
instance,
That's why I say Ricky Gervais went really easy on them because he could have been a far more
oh yeah, for sure.
savage.
Like I mean, but I even said this to Carl. Like Carl, why did you go even further in on Jesse? It's like I didn't really want to make that the whole thing. It's like no, dude. Remember what Trump did? I even
Yeah,
said like
exactly.
the things I would have called Jess Phillips. My God, like, are you sure you want to hear some of these?
Well,
Are you sure you want to hear some of these?
and so this doesn't go on too long. Do you have
Yeah.
anything in closing that you would like to add about the topic, or any closing statement you'd like to make about anything we've talked about today?
Well, blowing my own trumpet, but I do feel that the entire Western world needs to have these conversations. It may not. It all start with just, let's say, us two talking on YouTube,
Mm-hmm.
but it really needs to be held in our university, our colleges, in our school system,
Mm-hmm.
in our politics, in our economics. We really
Mm-hmm.
need to start asking these hard questions.
Okay. On that
And
point,
if
since
we,
go ahead.
sorry, and if we don't ask these questions, there's just a giant tidal wave coming in for us. And the only ones who are going to survive are those who have enough money to get away from it all.
Exactly. So since you and I are in complete agreement on that statement, I will let that be my closing statement as well. Like I always say, it's better to use words than weapons. And for every word or idea that's taken off the table, a weapon is armed under the table. Use your voices, everyone. Speak loud and speak the truth, and hopefully that will echo into the future and take us to a better time. So with that, we're going to close. Thank you for joining me, Kizza. I hope everyone listening had a wonderful time. And as always, you can find this on BitChute, usually an hour or so after it's uploaded on YouTube. And with that, I bid everyone a great day and God bless.